Well, we can get out of the United Nations the same way we got in, and that is to rescind our treaty. The Senate has the ability to sign onto a treaty. It also has the ability to cancel a treaty if it wishes. It has the backbone to do so. That's how it would be done legally or technically. But before that will happen, we need to create a great groundswell of awakening on the part of the American people to back their senators in such a move. Because right now, if anybody made that recommendation, and there have been a few, the average American says, what's that all about? Why would we want to get out of the United Nations? Isn't that a good organization? You know, that's their thinking. So as long as there's that lack of real information about the United Nations, as long as people are still buying the myth instead of the reality, there's no chance in the world that the Senate is going to do that. So we start down this path with an awakening program. We've got to spread the truth about the United Nations to all of our friends. Some people don't want to be awakened, so I suppose, and I have a few in my acquaintance, they just don't want to hear this because it upsets them. Their nice little world is that everything is fine. We're having problems, yes, but we've got all well-intentioned people as leaders, and there are no hidden agendas, there are no conspiracies out there. Everything is just what it appears to be on the nightly news. And they don't want to hear this thing because that runs contrary to their little worldview. But I think that even those people are susceptible to the truth if they are shown some real hard facts. When I wrote one, in fact, it was my first book so many years ago. It was published in 1974, called The Fearful Master, A Second Look at the United Nations. The first part of the book had to do with the actual history of the United Nations military action in the Katanga, in Katanga province in Africa. And I don't believe it's anybody can read the details of that. And this, by the way, these details are coming from the people who lived through it, and in many cases, even the United Nations personnel who were involved in it, boasting about what they were doing. Some of these United Nations people, like Connor Cruz O'Brien, who was one of the top leaders of the whole movement there in Katanga, said that, well, of course we lied to the people. That's what we're expected to do. He was very proud about it and very open. He said, we know that the United Nations Charter says we must not intervene in the internal affairs of a nation. He said, but that's silly, of course. But that's why we were there, is to intervene in the internal affairs of the nation. Of course we lied about it. And so what I'm trying to say is that once a person actually sees real history of this so-called peacekeeping force, which was nothing but an invading army, a United Nations army invading a peaceful province of Katanga, which had no problem of civil unrest. Their economy was functioning. There was chaos going all around it, but did the peacekeepers go into the chaotic areas? No. They went into the peaceful area in order to bring them down and bring them under the blanket of totalitarian control for the whole region. And it's just an amazing story, and you cannot believe it until you actually see it and hear it spoken by the people who participated in it. So what I'm trying to say is that once people begin to understand real history and really understand what's going on, not just mythological interpretation that you get off of the boob tube, but really get behind the scenes, then I think they'll begin to question that the United Nations maybe isn't all of this apple pie and ice cream that it's supposed to be. Once that happens, perhaps it'll not happen until there are so-called peacekeepers parading the streets of America. I don't know. Maybe then they'll finally get it. But somewhere down the line, Americans will understand that the United Nations is not a peaceful organization, and that the peacekeepers are not there to keep the peace, but to wage war against its enemies. Once they understand that the type of the government being created by the United Nations is totalitarian in nature, once they see that, and they can get past the propaganda and actually see it with real live events, then the game is over. Earlier, I think you asked, how long will it take, or what will it take? The answer to that is I don't know how long it will take, because it depends on how events will play out. I do know that eventually almost everyone on the planet will understand the deception behind the United Nations. The only question, it's an annoying question, is will it be soon enough to do anything about it? Because once the United Nations grows to the point where it's given a monopoly over all the mass weapons, then who can stand against it? It's just an internationally secure, totalitarian system. We've got to break its grip before it reaches that point. Years ago, I used to run into a lot of apathetic people. I don't so much anymore, and the explanation for that may surprise you. It's not that that people are much different, it's that I'm different. Here's how that came about. I remember when I was first becoming aware of these events that we're talking about, I was very alarmed, very concerned, and I wanted everyone to hear and to understand. So I would back up the truck to somebody and pull the lever and dump them with all of this newfound knowledge I had, and bury them, scare them to death, and they start getting this glazed look in their eye, like, oh, well, I think I better go to my golf game or something. They did not want to hear all this. And I remember saying to myself, how apathetic these people are. Why don't they take an interest? And then one day I realized that I was the problem, much more than they. And then I realized that I did such a wonderful job of convincing people that things were so bad that there was nothing they could do about it. And therefore they became apathetic. But then I resolved from that point forward, I would always try, when I'm talking to somebody, to present at least a vision of something that can be done. And not just say it to make it sound good, but to really have a plan that can be done. And since I adopted that philosophy and that approach, I don't run into apathetic people very often anymore. I think there's a tremendous amount of progress in terms of an awakening of the public. The worse things get, of course, the easier it is to see that you've got a problem. The higher the water rises in the boat, the more obvious it is that that boat is in danger of sinking. But I don't see much progress in terms of actually reversing the trend or getting the water out of the boat. Awareness, yes. Effective action, no. Mainly because people don't know what to do. That's the reason. That's the reason we created Freedom Force International. We know what to do. We know how to reverse this trend. The answer is very simple. It's not to read another book, not to become more informed, or hear another speech, or just wring your hands and say, well, we ought to do this and we ought to do that. The answer is to reacquire control of the political system that we live in. That can be done relatively simply, much more easy than most people realize. We have to recapture control of the power centers of society. What are they? The power centers. Those are the groups and organizations through which the masses of the people work and move and think and create public policy. We're talking about the political parties. We're talking about the labor unions. We're talking about the educational system. We're talking about the media. There's certain major centers of power in every country. And whoever controls those power centers really controls the nation, and they don't have to have a lot of membership. That's why an organization like the CFR with less than 4,000 members can control the whole country. Why? Because all of those people are not just out there cutting lawns and running some little business, selling camera supplies or something like that. Every one of them have gravitated or tried to gravitate into the tops of the power centers of the nation. And so you find them in the political parties. You find them in the labor unions and the heads of the universities and the media centers. So 4,000 people in the positions of power, in the power centers, the tops of the power center, can literally control the nation. This is what we have to do. We have to retake those power centers away from collectivists, away from the global elitists, and put them in the hands of people with no particular axe to grind, no agenda, except to restore freedom to America. It can be done.